僕は人間ですよね。
Are you human? How do you know? Can you prove it? You, as you exist right now, an amalgamation of thoughts, memories, ideas, flesh, fat, and bone, can you really be considered human? What does it even mean to be human anyways? Is it quantifiable? Can some substantive measure be made as to how human we can be? Does it matter to be human? Yukikaze, more specifically its OVA adaptation Battle Fairy Yukikaze, attempts to answer this question in part through its discussion of what's called the Uncanny, the similar yet dissimilar aspects of our existence that disturb our thoughts, all the while linking us back to this question, the very nature of the human condition. Originally written by Chohei Kambayashi as a series of short stories published in the SF magazine from 1979 to 1983, it found success rather quickly, with their compilation into a novel followed by 4 sequels. However, it was only adapted into the anime format by Studio Gonzo in 2002, with production directed by Masahiro Okura, and whose adaptation of the source material serves as the focus of this analysis. I've previously described Yukikaze as the example for how military science fiction should be presented, enigmatic yet brimming with creativity. Yet, I've continually neglected to consider or engage analytically with anything past the skin of this show, entirely discarding its more psychological and philosophical aspects that comprise the actual substance of the show, the relationships between its characters, and what any of it all really means. Well, let's change that. I'll assume that you don't know much about either Yukikaze or the Uncanny as a concept, so I'll break down both of them first, that way we're on the same page here. For those uninitiated, Yukikaze is a grounded, hard science fiction series originally written by Chohei Kambayashi. Only 5 episodes long, and with a total runtime of about 3 hours, Yukikaze's OVA adaptation only comprises the first 2 novels, Yukikaze and Good Luck Yukikaze, which released in 1984 and 1999 respectively. It's a criminally short adaptation, sure, but nevertheless enjoyable all throughout, so I'd recommend that you watch it before continuing, but you really don't need to in order to understand anything I'm gonna say. Imagine, if you will, what if humanity wasn't the most intelligent species out there? What if, with all the combined human intelligence and total knowledge accrued over millennia of human existence, there was something out there that could rival even our newest creations, and adapt to our inventions to improve themselves? Decades before our beginning, an enormous column of mist opens up in Antarctica, arriving with it an alien invader known simply as the Jam. A highly advanced airborne species, little is known about the Jam, their origins, their sentience. All we know is their aggression. Their invasion sparks a war of survival for humanity, eventually won through the combined efforts of the UN, forcing the Jam back through the column. On the other side, a mysterious planet, dubbed Fairy, is discovered, with the UN setting up expeditionary bases there. Since those years of conflict, humans on Earth have long since forgotten the Jam threat. However, for those of the Fairy Air Force still fighting the Jam on Fairy, the war is far from over. Typical is not the word one should use when describing Ray Fukai, second lieutenant of the Special Air Force, and intelligence branch of the Fairy Air Force. He pilots Boomerang Squadron Unit B503, an FFR-31MR/D Super Sylph armed reconnaissance plane equipped with a near-sentient AI system, nicknamed Yukikaze, the Winterly Wind. Emotionally lacking, a shell of a man, a machine. Ray has witnessed the aggression of the Jam firsthand. A passive observer in most battles, he has borne witness to entire squadrons wiped out by the Jam more times than he'd like. By his side, the near-sentient combat intelligence, Ray's guardian angel, and his closest friend, Yukikaze. Despite being a combat intelligence, Yukikaze possesses some type of personality. Defensive, protecting to the end. Rational, yet willing to do what it takes to finish the job. A beast of a machine that only Ray is able to tame. By following Ray and Yukikaze, Kambayashi exposes his audience to his core analysis of the idea of humanity, exploring what it really means to be human. Again, Yukikaze's premise is one of a kind, yet I can't delve into it as deeply as I'd like here. If you're interested in a deeper analysis of the premise behind Yukikaze, specifically looking at the kinds of greater thematic elements that Kambayashi used in his portrayal of this alien war, I'd highly recommend that you watch Argonbolt's review of the show. He highlights a bunch of interesting connections which I myself can't do justice, so I'd recommend his video for more of a breakdown into the creation, design, and story behind Yukikaze. Now, the other side of the coin. Sigmund Freud. Yes, that Freud. Was an Austrian neurologist more commonly known as the founder of what we today know as psychoanalysis, which itself analyzes the psyche, your conscious and unconscious mind, your thoughts, your behaviors, to better understand you as you are. Freud, like other neurologists of the time, was interested in this idea of the subconscious, this part of our minds that acts and reacts without our specific control. Throughout many of his works, like The Ego and the Id, he talks about the effects that these subconscious thoughts have on our thought processes, and how they in turn affect our behaviors. Our focus, however, lies in the uncanny. Written by Freud in 1919, it develops on the core idea of the uncanny, which was originally expressed by Ernst Jentsch in his 1906 essay on the psychology of the uncanny. It's a little difficult to wrap your head around fully, and hell, it took me a couple of weeks and more than one mental breakdown to understand it myself, but once you do, it sort of makes sense. And even if it doesn't, I have it on good authority from my professor that you probably shouldn't be ashamed. God forbid in regards to someone like Freud. So, let's at least attempt to make this make sense. So what is the uncanny? The uncanny, as Freud puts it less than succinctly, resides in the domain of aesthetics, which concerns itself with what is beautiful, attractive, and sublime. However, it's specifically linked to the corner of aesthetics where all that is terrible, all that arouses dread and creeping horror, lies. A highly sensitive and varied feeling, its strength is largely dependent on the memories of the person who feels it. Not only is this feeling and what triggers it highly dependent on the person, but its reactive effects on said person are also extremely varied, making pinning down this feeling so much harder. This comes from the fact that this feeling itself belongs to the class of terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar. Thus, this familiar feeling is something already known, with added aspects to the old to make it feel new. These new aspects, comprising the renewed novelty of a once past memory or feeling, render it frightening, horrifying, even dreadful as a result, interpreted by our subconscious as a perversion of what we once thought to be correct. An easier way to put this would be to say that we have a memory of something very specific and uncommon, and for the sake of this example, we'll make this memory one of eating an orange. Since, in this scenario, eating an orange is specific and uncommon to us, we forget this feeling over time, as we don't eat oranges often enough to continually think of the orange's flavor. Due to its estrangement from our conscious, it escapes into our subconscious, where upon its recurrence, a perversion stemming from said estrangement changes the way we feel when eating oranges, perceiving it as not normal, but something strange, which sparks some sense of horror, fear, or dread in doing so. This perversion of our own memories turned against us, dubbed the Heimlich, the familiar, is what we understand to be uncanny. It's this recurrence of a once familiar sensation, perverted by our subconscious and turned against us, that makes up this feeling. The unheimlich, the unfamiliar, despite seemingly being the better descriptor for this feeling, is only used customarily, as the contrary of the familiar, with Heimlich better connecting this feeling to the ambivalence which develops towards our forgotten memories. Now, this perversion of our memories can spread to anything, and everything. Freud lists a bunch of scenarios and situations in which uncanny sentiments can arise. The animate, that which we consider to be alive in some sense of the word, can very seemingly become something that inspires horror, even if we surround ourselves with it every day. A good example, which Freud provides from Jentsch, examines the effect which conditions or inflictions like schizophrenia or epilepsy have on our perception of other people, animate beings, who, beyond their ailments, are perfectly normal. As he puts it, these conditions excite in the spectator the feeling that automatic, mechanical processes are at work, concealed behind the ordinary appearance of animation, which in turn spark an uncanny recurrence. Despite occurring in animate people, these conditions make those who suffer from them appear less like humans and more like automata, something which attempts, though unsuccessfully, to appear human. Their ailments make the inner workings of our human existence, the automatic mechanical processes which do not appear through the facade of our outer shells, far more apparent, making the human seem inhuman. Again, we aren't used to seeing each other's inner workings of the soul breaking down before us. This sense of automation is a novelty that's as familiar as unfamiliar, as we all contain these processes beneath our skin. However, we don't often visually see them break down. This unfamiliarity is precisely what strikes this uncanny feeling inside of us, the contrary to what we're so used to in humanity. He also connects this uncanny feeling to this idea that he's developed before, the castration complex. Freudian psychology is sometimes extremely uncomfortable, with this being one of its most blatant examples. To be brief, the castration complex derives from a lack of a certain thing that is believed to have once been there, with Freud making the example of girls lacking penises upon their realization of differences between the sexes, and boys fearing the loss of theirs, sparking the complex in question. In the context of the uncanny, the example of being robbed of one's eyes, as demonstrated through Hoffman's play The Sandman, signifies some correlation to the castration complex, with the fear of damaging or losing one's eyes being a terrible fear. the fear of losing something deeply important and critical to your existence. We all know this sensation of closing our eyes and seeing nothing but a dark, endless void. It's fair to assume that the same view would be exactly what we would see upon the loss of our eyes, absolute nothingness. Thus, this familiar yet eerie sense arises once again. As well as that, we see some connection between the eyes and the spirit, the soul if you will. To talk of what is behind the eyes is to talk of the brain, or the soul of the human. And to indicate that one is without eyes is to indicate that one is missing some core part of them that makes them human, a part of their soul, with inanimate objects that possess eyes possessing souls in some capacity. Thus, the difference between the animate and the inanimate is made distinct through the possession of human characteristics, such as eyes, real or imagined, as seen with Olympia, the lifelike doll in The Sandman, with its imagined soul only contributing to this uncanny feeling. Lastly, Freud connects the uncanny to the idea of the doppelganger, as well as to the idea of the double, as put forth by his friend and fellow psychoanalyst Otto Rank. The double, itself quantified as a form of insurance against the destruction of the ego, or an energetic denial of the power of death, serves as a means by which the mind separates itself from the things that bring it harm or discomfort, with death as one key example. This need for the double stems from the primary narcissism, wherein each one of us as developing humans creates a way to protect our fragile egos through the duplication of the self. Thus, as we grow older and more comfortable with our egos, the need for the double fades as our ideal selves emerge. Even if the double might fade, it doesn't disappear entirely, instead reforming into this special faculty, which criticizes and censors our own thoughts. In a way, the double forms another part of our subconscious which actively works against us, using our past memories to censor future mistakes. Thus, the double's uncanniness stems from its recurrence of past memories in an attempt to protect us. However, those recurrences spark uncanny feelings of dread, of horror, and of fear, with the double itself being uncanny, from the circumstance of the double being a creation dating back to a very early mental stage, long since left behind, in which it wore a more friendly aspect. Throughout all of these examples, of the automata, the castration complex, and the double, Freud continually defines the uncanny as a recurrence of something that we once knew, a familiar aspect of our collected experiences, feelings, and memories, taken and reformed through a perversion with something new, ultimately creating what we understand to be this uncanny feeling. But in what way does this all connect to Yukikaze? Understanding the uncanny as Freud describes it, which I've hopefully explained clearly and decently well, Yukikaze rather bluntly demonstrates a deep integration, either purposefully or not, of ideas raised in the uncanny into its visual and thematic development. For the sake of clarity, we'll break the discussion into multiple parts. Oh, and of course, spoilers ahead. Automatic, antisocial, anthropomorphic. Yukikaze bears countless human traits despite never gaining human form. I ask therefore, is it possible to be human without being human? Yukikaze is an at times self-conscious, emotional, yet rational and logical AI, who throughout the series dabbles between being either machine or man. They act independently when they shouldn't, disobeying orders when they go against what they feel is right. In episode 1, they detach an experimental airframe from a test flight to save Ray's life from a jammed clone, despite that decision having no logical importance whatsoever. Ray's just another pilot. He's replaceable, just like every other pilot on ferry, yet Yukikaze saves him anyways, as if he cares for one pilot dying on a battlefield that's already soaked in blood. Not only does it save Ray, but Yukikaze also destroys its own airframe in the process. Self-preservation? Never heard of it. Yukikaze acts in complete contempt of its own existence, recklessly rushing towards annihilation on a whim even if it means saving those it cares about. At the end of the series in episode 5, Yukikaze, along with Ray, sacrifice themselves to save the rest of the FAF contingent on ferry, as they escape the planet. In doing so, Yukikaze demonstrates a remarkable binary in its own existence, that it both cares about others to such a degree that it would put its own existence into peril. When we think of ourselves, what do we imagine? Do we imagine the ideal human state, where we are all caring individuals who will do as needed for each other as much as we will do for ourselves? Is abundance in the care of others solely a human trait, or rather the human trait which defines one from another? Or is there more to what we consider to be humanity? Yukikaze, beyond just self-sacrifice, demonstrates an advanced capacity for self-thought, much more advanced than any computer of today. An advanced battle computer prototype, it makes conclusions based on limited evidence. Following multiple engagements with jam clones, Yukikaze begins to spot patterns in their actions. In episode 1, when the unknown soldier attempts to trick Ray into giving him access into Yukikaze, they warn Ray with a console message on the pilot's main display, a warning in the brief language it was trained on. Caution, repeated over and over again. In the opening to episode 2, they infer from their knowledge that the planes on the tarmac aren't real planes, but instead more jam clones, hiding in plain sight. With this knowledge, Yukikaze makes informed decisions and acts accordingly, acting on his own to destroy said planes, because what they know, no one else does. Yukikaze is one of a kind, an advanced prototype AI that shoehorned its way into an experimental fighter, refusing to be piloted by anyone else other than Rei. Yukikaze has the capacity to choose favorites. They don't like some people, they don't trust others, they don't let others come near them, even killing those they deem a threat. They are conscious in the decisions that they make, the actions they commit, and the method by which their goals are met. Take for example the aforementioned ending sequence in episode 5, where Rei and Yukikaze sacrifice themselves in order to save the rest of the FAF. It's statistically the only option that will have the most success, but it involves both of their lives being put at risk. Yukikaze could have very well refused, as they had with other pilots who had attempted to control them in the past. However, they didn't. They were more than just a willing participant. They agreed with the end goal and the means through which it would be met, even if it meant the end of their existence. They are, in some sense of the word, self-conscious. What does any of this have to do with the Uncanny? Well, Freud references a specific portion of Jentsch's conjecture on the Uncanny early on in section 2. I'll go ahead and read it verbatim. Quote, "In telling a story, one of the most successful devices for easily creating uncanny effects is to leave the reader in uncertainty whether a particular figure in the story is a human being or an automaton, and to do it in such a way that his attention is not directly focused upon his uncertainty, so that he may not be urged to go into the matter and clear it up immediately, since that would quickly dissipate the peculiar emotional effect of the thing." The human-like aspects that Yukikaze possesses are contrasted against their inhuman traits, their empathy against their lack of emotion, their sentience against their callousness. Yukikaze acts like a robot, but thinks like a human. This half-man, half-machine that we spend the entire series fixating upon tingles this sensation in the back of our heads, if not very faintly, reminding us of something extremely familiar yet oddly distant. Yukikaze's existence is a recurrence of a corrupted form of humanity, barring anything that would make a human human. They have no body, no form, no voice to respond to, no emotions, nothing but a cold, calculating, but oddly empathetic, caring and protective demeanor. This uncertainty, of whether they are really human or not, of whether Yukikaze really is self-conscious, or dare I say sentient, spurs this horror or fear that we would deem as uncanny. That we would think that a machine could remain as comparable to something as familiar to us as another human is intolerable to our subconscious minds. Thus, we fear it. This uncertainty towards humanity, however, doesn't just exist in Yukikaze. In episode 3, we're introduced to Tom John, an aircraft mechanic with an exceptional personality. Enthralled by all things mechanical, he charges himself with their maintenance as if the machines have a soul. In fact, he himself is a machine with a soul, though only partly. Born fairly weak, Tom has an artificial, plutonium-powered heart that keeps him alive. Due to his weakness, Tom has a particular aversion to violence. Self-describing himself as a coward, he comes from a proud tribe of indigenous American warriors, but he himself has never enjoyed fighting. He's a conscientious objector, outright refusing but ultimately accepting to just hold a weapon during dangerous times. So, Tom is an impassioned mechanic, whose empathy towards other people and other things drives him insofar as to not even hurt anything or anyone that would hurt him, while doing his best to remedy their plights. So it comes as a shock when we find out that one of the only people in favor of human intervention with machines isn't even human themselves. Things go awry, with Rei and Tom finding themselves stuck on an airship surrounded by jam. Tom puts himself in harm's way to buy time for Rei, in doing so being fatally wounded. But he has no blood. Tom is a jam clone. He lacks organs. His plutonium heart is gone. However, his mannerisms, his emotions, his reasoning, and his empathy, his sentience, his very soul, force us to believe that he is in some way human. Not only is there this uncanny feeling in the end for Tom, where those things that define his very soul, specifically his heart, but more so his entire physical being, come into question as if they were stolen or taken, cut off from his body. But there's also this uncanny feeling which derives from our uncertainty as to whether, with all the information we have about him, if Tom really is human. While Yukikaze is a great example of the uncanniness of the automata, Tom stands in as our example for Freud's castration complex. While Freud throughout the text refers to the castration complex with the example of the eyes, as seen in Hoffman's work, it really applies to any organ, as it is very natural that so precious an organ as the eye, and others like it, should be guarded by a proportionate dread. Indeed, we might go further and say that the fear of castration itself contains no other significance and no deeper secret than a justifiable dread of this kind. Something as core to our existence as our hearts, the very thing that keeps us alive, that keeps the blood pumping and our bodies moving, Simply not being there when we remember that it was, as if it was taken out from under us, fills us with an undeniable sense of dread and horror. Once more, a recurrence of a memory corrupted by a newfound truth only pushes forward these uncanny feelings. Similar yet ever distinct to Yukikaze, the Jam remains as one of the most interesting depictions of an antagonist in science fiction to date. Despite having a central role in the plot, we never actually see anything from their point of view, with the Jam existing as one congruent entity with no actual sentience. Instead, they mimic other beings in order to evolve, with the only contact we have with the Jam being through their numerous forms of mimicry. The aeronautic, jet-like forms which the pilots engage with, combined with the Jam copies, like Tom and the rogue Super Sylph, that Rei and Yukikaze investigate and uncover. In Episode 1, it's demonstrated that the Jam simply don't create new forms or technologies to adapt to new technologies as previously thought, but also retain the ability to mimic or copy those of humanity, with the forms of human beings included. The exact method of how this happens remains unanswered, however the end result is a being which believes from the ground up that it is indeed human. They contain all of the memories, life experiences, and recollections of their original human. However, it doesn't know that the original is no more, or that they themselves aren't the original at all. Returning back to Yench's statement from earlier, the primary uncanny aspect of the Jam copies as a whole relies on the uncertainty of both the Jam copies and those surrounded by them towards their own humanity, and whether it has been separated from them by some means. As we see with Tom, these clones are in fact sentient, able to conceive of the fact, when confronted with indisputable evidence such as a lack of blood, that they are indeed copies and not truly human, and handle it accordingly. These clones experience a recurrence of memories from the people that they've become, continuing exactly where they left off with the belief that those memories are indeed theirs. These memories in some ways serve as a way for the central Jam entity, which acts not like a group of individuals like humans, but rather more as a hive mind, to criticize itself in a way like the double does in matured humans, but also to experience something that it otherwise cannot, that being the pleasure of the human existence. To quote Freud verbatim again, "But it is not only this primary narcissism, offensive to the ego-criticizing faculty which may be incorporated in the idea of a double. There are also all those unfulfilled but possible futures to which we still like to cling in fantasy, all those strivings of the ego, which adverse external circumstances have crushed, and all our suppressed acts of volition which nourish us in the illusion of free will." The Jam has a need for criticism. Its very existence relies on continuous evolution through the absorption of other species' technological developments and understandings, as they can't develop anything for themselves. Thus, to know what to absorb that will positively benefit them as a species and to know what to avoid that will negatively affect their congruence is essential to their development. Human sentience possesses the ability to greatly benefit the individual decision-making of those who possess it. However, it comes with the wants, dreams, and desires for freedom. These doubles, the clones, exist as a way for the greater Jam entity to both dabble in improving itself while experiencing our notions of free will on a grander scale, to experience life as we do. Once this free Jam being realizes what it is and how it was created, a recurrence of its suppressed origin spurs these horrors and fear that we call the uncanny. To come full circle, what does it mean to be human? Is there a collective agreement that humanity is something that we all share? Is it something that only a few of us have, and the rest are missing in some way or the other? How do we tell which ones among us belong and own this state of humanity? Or is it something that we simply can't tell? Is it something that we can tell, but we just don't know that we actually are able to discern it, in some sense regulating that matter to our subconscious? What makes up this humanity? What traits make it up specifically? Logic? Not everyone is logical, some are more emotional. Empathy? Psychopaths walk among us, with some deigning to call them inhuman. Again, the question of what exactly is human becomes apparent. In relation to Yukikaze, we have this robot, this computer, an AI, a non-corporeal being that despite being such embodies human traits. They show empathy and logic through their actions concerning Rei and the Jam, acting in advance in a cold and calculating manner, yet with the capability to act not in their own interest or in the interest of logic, and instead for the common good, sacrificing themselves even when they have to. I think what's mainly uncanny about Yukikaze in this sense is that despite having actions rooted in a sense of humanity, their status as a human isn't exactly static. They have a personality, yet it doesn't manifest in the same way as a human one. They're human in a sense, but not in the most important ways possible, which makes them seem familiar as their actions are rightly so. However, their actual demeanor, their method of demonstrating their personality, is so unhuman, so robotic, that it produces the uncanny feeling that the core sentiment of their character radiates, this Heimlich sensation that reminds us of the most familiar sensations of being a human being, those connections that matter, while removing the very aspects that make human connection enjoyable. With that, I believe that, in the case of Yukikaze, being human isn't a physical set of characteristics, having a body, a heart, a brain. Instead, it's this combination of different thought processes and experiences which, when glanced upon and interacted with by another, lends them some sort of validation, that you aren't just some mindless drone, and that you can think for yourself. In the end, to be human is to strike the balance between the automatic processes that make us function, while still having the heart to act out, to live free, and to not be bound by the circumstances of our creation. And that's about it. My oldest Yukikaze video recently reached 5,000 views, which is a first for me by a long shot. Most of my videos get nowhere near that much attention, so I'd like to thank each and every one of you for helping me reach this milestone. I've been a big fan of Yukikaze for a while, as I think it's a great series with a lot going on for it. I might do some other content for it later on, maybe in like a year or so, but I think I'm quite content with the state of its coverage as relating to its popularity here on YouTube. As stated before, Arnold has a lot on the other side of the coin cupboard, and he did a pretty good job in doing so, which really contributes to this feeling of satisfaction that I probably won't be shifted from. Hell, I might just do a Marxist analysis of it for fun. Just kidding, I think that would actually kill me. Anyway, stay safe, have a good one.